Hello, hello everyone. Welcome. Just give you a minute here to join today's session. So welcome all, and thank you for joining Women's Way for the Closing the Gender Wealth Gap Forum, Stability and Opportunity. I'm Diane Corman-Levy, the Chief Disruptor of Women's Way, and I'm delighted that you've all decided to spend the next 90 minutes with us. When we refer to women, we mean trans and cis women and femme-identified people, which includes anyone who is not a trans or cis woman, but who identifies as feminine, and also those who identify as gender expansive, non-binary, and or gender non-conforming. While we wait for more folks to sign on, I would appreciate you taking the poll because we always want to know if this is your first time attending a Women's Way event. So if you just take a second to complete that, that would be great. So today's forum is part of a year-long series whose purpose is to educate different stakeholders about the drivers of the gender wealth gap and action steps each of us can take to help close the gender wealth gap. Since October 2020, we have conducted 24 forums that have addressed different drivers of the gender wealth gap, such as strengthening the early childhood education sector, decreasing gender and racial disparities in healthcare, and increasing access to affordable housing. During this year, we'll explore how we can create a future where all women have the stability, care, and opportunities they need to thrive. Each session will spotlight the change makers and organizations working across 4 dimensions of the gender wealth framework, a tool developed by Women's Way to promote dignity, equity, and joy in our communities. Today's session will explore the dimension of stability and opportunity, such as being free from exploitative debt, having access to good jobs that pay fair wages, and a social safety net that guarantees basic rights without barriers. You will have opportunities to ask questions to the speakers via the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to address as many of your questions as possible. Closed captioning is enabled. If you do not want to see closed captioning, you can click the Hide CC button at the bottom of your screen. The chat is also enabled, so please share your comments during the session. To create a safer space for all of us to engage in honest and challenging discussions, we ask each of you to abide to the session's norms listed in the chat box. Finally, we will record the session and make it available for you to view again and for those who cannot attend today's session. After the session, we will also send you a list of resources related to today's topics and a survey to evaluate this session. We deeply value your input as we work to continually improve these educational forums. So before we get to the facilitated panel discussion, Kelly Shear, Chief Strategy Officer, and I are going to spend the next few minutes providing an overview of the economic state of women, our new theory of change, and key concepts related to the gender wealth framework. So for the past year, we have been involved in a very thoughtful process to create our new 3-year strategic plan, which we are officially launching this month. This plan has an updated vision and mission statement, a new theory of change, and also 5 strategic pathways in terms of how we're going to get to ultimately realize our vision. So this is our vision statement, our starting point, what we dream of when we envision the future. And we really want to have a world where everyone, especially those historically impacted by gender inequities, has security, dignity, freedom, and joy. And this could look like a wider community coming together to ensure access to abortion and gender-affirming care. It could look like the opportunity to grow a family and not sacrifice a career, or post-incarceration resources to stabilize re-entering citizens. So our vision statement, directly related to our vision statement, is our mission, of course, why we exist and how we achieve our vision. Here we're talking about our vision is really about achieving gender equity by building collective power to disrupt oppressive systems such as white supremacy and patriarchy, which we are witnessing a lot in action right now, and also investing and strengthening other options that will lead us to a brighter future. So we're very much interested in strengthening alternative economic models centered in love, dignity, and liberation. So I share this a lot, and I share this every time because the economic state of women has not been great, and it's still not good. We know that those who are living paycheck to paycheck are not able to cover an unexpected $400 expense, and most of them are women. The region's largest demographic group living in the Philadelphia area are women ages 25 to 34. And related to these stats is the gender wealth gap, which is larger than the gender pay gap and continues to grow. For every dollar a white man owns in material wealth, women overall own about 32 cents. When considering the racial demographics of the same statistic, Black and Latino women own just 1 penny. The gender wealth gap is a stronger indicator of economic insecurity than the pay gap, as it influences the ability to weather current financial challenges as well as save and invest for the future, which is directly related to the retirement gap, where 80% of women are likely to be living in poverty by age 65. So why is this happening? Why are women and gender expansive folks not doing as well in terms of wealth? They're experiencing wealth. So let's talk about the problem that we're trying to address. Like racial injustice, climate change, and world hunger, the gender wealth gap is a systemic issue, and it will require systemic answers. It is therefore important to examine the design of systems that consistently produce this outcome. Systems are not natural or inevitable. They are constructed by decisions and choices. Our dominant economic system is designed to embed racialized capitalism, wealth supremacy, and heteropatriarchy into its very function, leading to a growing gender wealth gap. And I like to spend a couple minutes examining these theoretical frameworks because they help explain why and how marginalized genders have inadequate access to and limited experience of wealth. So racialized capitalism is capitalism at its core and is focused on private ownership of property where one class of people control and profit from the labor of the subordinate class. And the social and economic structure of capitalism reflects a system of relationships of domination among categories of people. In the United States, that domination is often racialized. And wealth supremacy is an economic system that believes wealthy people matter more than others. And we're certainly seeing this with our current administration. It is cultural and political processes and attitudes by which wealthy people accumulate and maintain prestige, power, and privilege. Our economic system protects the extreme hoarding of the privileged class by supporting and enabling strategies of extraction and exploitation. And I want to be very clear that the wealthiest people obtain wealth primarily from forms of extraction and exploitation. And then heteropatriarchy is a logic that justifies the subordination of all those who are not heterosexual cisgender men. Anything outside of this constructed norm is seen as deviant and unworthy, and therefore dehumanization and oppression of other genders becomes justified. And of course, we're hearing this happening so much with the LGBTQ and particularly the trans population right now. So yes, this is daunting. It's a huge problem. How the heck do we address this problem, right? How do we actually foster systems change? Well, to challenge and disrupt dominant systems that perpetuate and worsen gender inequities, we must understand the conditions that keep systems in place. And this diagram shows 6 conditions that keep a problem in place. The explicit conditions, which we tend to focus on a lot, include policies, practices, and resource flows, such as government, institution, and organizational rules, regulation, and priorities, activities of institution, coalition, networks, and other entities targeted to improving social and environmental progress, and how money, people, knowledge, information, and other assets are allocated and distributed. The semi-explicit conditions are relationships and connections and power dynamics, which are the quality of connections and communications occurring among actors in the system and the distribution of decision-making power, authority, and influence among individuals and organizations. And I really want to highlight the implicit conditions, which are mental models, which often we don't talk about when we talk about systems change. Right? And mental models are deeply held beliefs and assumptions and taken for granted ways of operating that influence how we think, what we do, and how we talk. And mental models are shaped and influenced by narratives, which are the stories we tell and the mindsets, beliefs, and ideas we hold that help us organize our thinking and explain how the world works. And when it comes to the gender wealth gap, we often find harmful narratives that prop up oppressive power structures and enable inequitable outcomes. And we certainly are hearing a lot of these narratives happening right now. So how is this related to our theory of change? And again, this is our theory of change and what it will take to realize our mission and ultimately our vision. So as I said, gender inequities are deeply rooted in longstanding systems of white supremacy and capitalism. And we must tackle them at the root in order to see the changes. We can't just keep treating the symptoms and not address the root causes. I'm sorry. Whoops. What happened to my thing? All right. So to do this, we will invest in narrative change because, as I said before, narratives affect our mental models. Mental models is where systems come out of. And we will invest in narrative change that will shift the conversations about gender and economic equity. And we'll also build the capacity of our partners to lead and invest with equity. So through our narrative change work, we're going to be centering the stories and experience of gender oppressed people. And ultimately, we're hoping to see a different cultural narrative that takes hold in communities and organizations and halls of power. Capacity building, we want to build the capacity for systems level change. So the Closing the Gender Wealth Gap series is one part of that. How do we get people to understand what are the root causes of the gender wealth gap and what can we do to address those root causes? We're also going to be investing in collective work aimed at root causes and convening communities of practice, ultimately leading to women and gender oppressed people's collective powers increase to make systemic transformative change and alternative community wealth building models grow and proliferate. So this is a lot, I know, but this is our new theory of change, which is really guiding our work as we move forward. So I'm going to pass this on to Kelly Sheard, who is our Chief Strategy Officer. Kelly.
Thank you, Diane. First, we want to start by centering our definition of wealth, pioneered by our friends at the Maven Collaborative. When wealth is accumulated, we live and retire with greater dignity, freedom, and peace of mind. Our communities are prosperous, resilient, and vibrant. Future generations have the freedom to dream big and become all they truly can be. And we are healthy and know that our families, networks, and communities are healthy, spiritually whole, and contributing. It's important for us to start here because we want to move the conversation beyond individual economic stability and the possession of financial assets. Both of these concepts are important, but often not enough to encompass the lived experience of abundance that we seek to build. Next slide. The gender wealth framework provides a way to capture the nuance of an experience of wealth that is most relevant to folks of a marginalized gender experience. It's a roadmap for our network to understand and measure whether their work is moving toward closing the gender wealth gap. The framework also emphasizes the importance of thinking about dominant narratives, meaning the stories we tell about how we got here, who deserves what in order to be well, and how our society should work. We also call attention to how these narratives inform the design and outcomes of the current economic system and how it impacts marginalized genders. For more information, please check out the Gender Wealth Framework Report, which will be linked in the chat. Next slide. So this is just a brief view of the gender wealth framework. The graphic is super small, the text is super small, but I'm going to walk us through each part of it. So the gender wealth framework expands how we think about and measure abundance and success. And the framework encompasses 3 components. Next slide. Material well-being measures traditional notions of economic stability and provides point-in-time assessments of one's financial portfolio. The measurements focus on access and affordability of resources. Lived experience measures the felt experience of abundance in communities and institutions. System conditions and context acknowledges and highlights the historical and current structures of wealth inequality by examining the conditions that are keeping us from making progress towards more liberatory futures. Conditions such as mindsets, power dynamics, policies, and resource flows. Next slide. From here, the gender wealth framework is focused on wealth in 5 dimensions. In today's session, we will be focused on stability and opportunity. Next slide. Going deeper, stability and opportunity is defined by the following indicators of success: access to quality jobs or self-employment that provide a family's self-thriving wage and benefits that allow folks to live with dignity and ease. Getting to do work they love without being undervalued in the market and can advance in any field free of dismantling structural biases. Having access to a social safety net that provides basic rights, such as healthcare, food, and shelter, by virtue of their humanity. And finally, being free from extractive debt policies and practices, and having access to affordable assets that build wealth. Next slide. Our goal with this session is to introduce you to organizations that are piloting innovative solutions in the stability and opportunity space. We want our network to understand what's possible as we work together to create futures of abundance that work for us all. To that end, I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, Nathifa Forde, Executive Director of NYC Her Future, into the space. Nathifa will introduce our panel of changemakers into the webinar. Welcome, Nathifa.
Hello, everyone. How are you? How are you? And before we start, I just want to say thank you to Women's Wave for really kind of convening this forum today on closing the gender wealth gap and really focusing on stability and opportunity. So as I was taking in everything that you guys were saying and just your overview, I hope that all of you guys were as well. I am, again, Nathifa Forde. I am the Executive Director of a newly created office called NYC Her Future that's really focusing on addressing the gender equity gap and really prioritizing our young women across New York City. And my office actually sits under the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, which is a new office that was created to really stand at the forum in our city to really address racial equity and social justice and say that this is just not a thing that we need to talk about in our agencies or talk about in our work. This is something that we need to put at the forefront and really address a lot of these things. One thing that I'll say is a lot of the things that were mentioned here, we understand the historical context. We also understand how we're navigating the space currently, and there is a place for all of us to really be hopeful. So I hope that through this forum and through this discussion, as I mentioned, all of the wonderful panelists, that we really kind of leave with this sense of hopefulness and this sense of how do we move the work forward and push the needle so that we ensure racial justice and racial equity and gender equity for all our people facing navigating the work both nationally and globally. So as we start, I want to turn it over and just allow our panelists to really introduce themselves and talk to a little bit about who they are and go from there. So first, I will pass it over to Dr. Richelle Brooks. Hello.
Hello, thank you, Nathifa. I appreciate it. Really excited to be here. I am Dr. Brooks. Do you want me to introduce myself now? Go into the spiel?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Remember,
Okay.
you have like a minute, so let's do this very quickly, kind of like 5
Yeah.
seconds. Yes.
Yeah, no problem. I'm Dr. Richelle Brooks. I'm organizer with the Debt Collective, educator, nonprofit founder, and a mama of 3 amazing kids. I live in Los Angeles, and I'm happy to be here with you all and share some exciting updates in my work and how we're moving towards a more equitable world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. And next we have Elizabeth Farwell Ozer. I hope I'm saying that, a senior manager of special projects at First Up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Farwell Ozer. I've been working in early education policy for about almost a decade. First Up is an early learning nonprofit, so most of my colleagues focus on early learning programs. And I'm in the public policy department, so we're working on strengthening the system overall. And I'm here today because the early childhood workforce is 92% women, so all of this pertains to the work that we do.
Wonderful. And next up, I would love to present Tara Murtha, Director of Impact and Engagement at the Women's Law Project.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you to Women's Way for having us all here today for this conversation. So Women's Law Project, if you're not familiar, is a public interest legal organization. We work to advance gender justice in Pennsylvania and beyond. Our work focuses on eliminating sex-based discrimination across a broad range of interrelated issues. We see reproductive freedom as the keystone to those interrelated issues. We can't all access equitable, can't have access to productive education and stable employment without the ability to determine if, when, and how to build our families. And something else to know about our work is that our program work, which includes impact litigation, policy advocacy, and community education, all derives from the courage of our clients in our direct legal aid program. So we work directly with people who are experiencing and navigating pregnancy discrimination, LGBTQ discrimination, workplace discrimination in school, those kinds of issues. So I appreciate being here today to contribute to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you to Diane Cormier-Levy that will be chiming in, and Kelly Sherd that will be chiming in as well. So are we ready to get started for this exciting conversation? And I think we just kind of want to ground it. I think the introduction that was presented by Women's Way was just grounded in all of the work that we do. And there's many intersections of how all of our work plays into addressing different disparities, but also moving the needle forward. So I would just like all of you guys to answer, what does opportunity mean for your work? How do you define opportunity as not just access, but equitable access to meaningful work that's wealth building and social mobility?
I can get us started. So I didn't talk a lot about what I do at the Debt Collective, but as an organizer, the goal is to dismantle the systems that cause folks to go into debt, right? We go into debt not because we're living beyond our means, but because we're denied the means to live. So when I think of opportunity from a debt analysis, it means freedom from financial constraints that disproportionately burden women, that disproportionately burden all gender marginalized people. It means access, free access to reparative public goods. That's education, that's healthcare, that's housing, that's childcare. Without the lifelong economic punishment that comes with debt, right? That if we cannot access the things that we need to survive without going into debt, then we're always going to continue to be in this cycle. So opportunity is about dismantling all gendered financial oppression that keeps women, particularly Black and Brown women, trapped in these cycles of being underpaid, of caregiving responsibilities, of all economic precarity. And then as an educator, I work to ensure that there's workforce development opportunities, that folks can get involved in their communities with organizing, ensuring that gender marginalized people can pursue education, they have access to that. There's no barriers in the way to building careers and stable futures with the weight of these unjust debts.
I can piggyback off of that with the debt piece. Dr. Brooks, speaking on the childcare workforce, it's a pretty marginalized job. Childcare workers were making in the bottom 5% of wages before the pandemic, and now they're at the bottom, they're below that. And almost half took a loan or borrowed to cover their expenses in a survey we took last month, and that was in a 6-month period. So they're really facing a kind of unsustainable expectation in terms of being the childcare workforce is reimbursed below the cost of the care that they provide. And in addition, the home-based providers we support are working usually 50 to 60-hour weeks. So the opportunities may exist for them to go out and pursue, more degrees or improve their program quality. But the fact the nature of these opportunities doesn't mesh with the nature of their work. So many are excluded because they can't leave their program during the day to go to an office or go to an appointment or have a meeting about, something they might like to embark on. And then at the same time, they often don't have the time to find out about these opportunities. And then even for, people that do know what they want to do and have figured out part of that, there's a big expense in moving in program quality, which would result in them getting slightly more income, but the upfront cost to get there isn't provided. And then in addition, for our teachers that are looking to pursue degrees so that they can be eligible for higher wage bands, they don't make enough to cover the cost of getting that degree. So there's no motivation unless people are just intrinsically motivated to get that. So we're looking at teachers who could double their salary if they went into a K-12 position. But the educators are, on average making less than retail. They're making less than, housekeeping. They're making less than our home health aides and our landscapers who require a lot less training to get their positions. So there's a lot of lack of opportunity. And then for the women who rely on childcare, when those childcare programs close, the opportunity to advance their careers, to have a stable home is also eroded.
Thank you both for really kind of lifting those pieces up. And I think Dr. Brooks kind of said it like a freedom from financial restraints. And as Elizabeth was speaking, it is that cycle, right? So it's just like, do we pay the providers more or give them the opportunity to advance themselves, but still meet the demand of the working mom needing you to be ready? So it's literally this topsy-turvy space that we talk about. And I think the example was just so on point because that is literally the freedom of financial restraints because people have to pay their bills. So I really appreciate the way you guys lifted that up and really just piggybacked off each other really nicely. Tara, would you like to add anything there before I go to the next question?
Yeah. I think from our point of view regarding clients, opportunity is autonomy, the opportunity to act as your own agent, to have reproductive autonomy, to be able to have the gender identity, express the gender identity you want to, and able to, have autonomy to navigate your life and society without undue political interference and barriers from the state with whatever that looks like. It's interesting. We actually use the phrase opportunity state at Women's Law Project to describe Pennsylvania in the last couple years after the U.S. Supreme Court deprived us of our federal right to abortion. In Dobbs, you see that states are split. You see the map updated way too often into, freedom states and abortion ban states. But we call Pennsylvania an opportunity state because, yes, we have rights in Pennsylvania, more rights than in other states. We are a freedom state, but there are so many political restrictions that undermine equitable access to healthcare, to education. From the policy perspective, there's many opportunities to increase people's ability to act autonomously in their own lives. We need to improve on the state level our equal pay law, for example, which hasn't been updated since, I believe, 1969, when it was amended to apply to fewer people. We need to raise the minimum wage. We're talking about and living in a state where the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. That's $15,000 working full-time year-round. That does not provide, opportunity for people to live their lives autonomously and make all those other decisions about who they want to be and how they want to live.
Thank you. So I feel like we're kind of going into the next question. And the next question is really around how does your work interact with one another? And I think the first question kind of showed that natural point of intersection where all the work gels together. But thinking of how none of this work happens in silos, like it doesn't matter how we decide to work, it really does take a community of people, of individuals, organizations, and entities, municipalities to work together to really kind of say, this is the change that we want and moving forward that way. So as you guys kind of mentioned, a lot about what you do. Speak about like, how does this all work together, and where are these natural points of intersection that we really need to double down on?
I can start us off. I'll say childcare is sort of doing double duty where it is a female-centered field. So there's a ton of economic power just in how many women are employed in that field, how many female business owners, and then how many, families are impacted, the majority of whom, the majority of parents impacted by childcare are women. So for there to be a strong childcare system with, access and affordability and high quality care would really is a main is a foundational piece of women doing well in their careers and having the ability to have stable financial situations.
And I think from the perspective of building out a base in order to organize around gender equity, it requires awareness, right? It requires us having these conversations, us sharing spaces, inviting women into the conversation so that we can hear their stories. And a huge piece of that is the financial freedom that comes with being able to have higher paying wages. As a mom, I know when I'm trying to survive, which is all the time, I can work up to 3 jobs. And it's very difficult to show up for my community, to show up in and build collective power when my worry is how am I going to pay the bills every day. So we're better united, and we have a lot more to offer one another when we can show up for each other and when our basic needs are met. And that's the intersection that I see between all of our work.
Yeah, and I'll chime in as a legal organization. It might sound counterintuitive, but I think it's really important that we stay in our lane. All respect to organizers, all respect to people on the ground, but it's about alignment. We need to learn from organizers, and we do learn from organizers and from clients, as I mentioned earlier, what's happening on the ground. There's, the 2 common scenarios. There might be a bad policy that needs to be fixed or a good policy that needs to be enforced. And we're only going to know that from talking to people, that all of our issues affect directly. And I'll just give a shout out to the Philadelphia public interest community, which is just a wonderful, robust community that even, now in the last few days with all the chaotic news, I'm able to reach out and say, what do our immigrant friends need to know about what's happening? And share that information quickly to make sure that we're all, again, staying in our lane while being really connected and aligned with, other parts of the movement.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And just also for like this New York City perspective under the office of the Mayor's Office of Equity and Social Justice, I think we understand, and I really want to just lift up Tara's point of staying in your lane. A lot of our issues we are addressing overlapping issues like income, inequality, housing discrimination. But I do think it is power in understanding what we do well and what each entity does well, and trusting them to do that well while we hold down the fort in other areas. And that's why these forums are so complementary, because we understand and how our work essentially works together. So thank you for lifting that up. I do want to dive in a little deeper. And this question is, I want to just kind of tap into Tara and Dr. Brooks. Why is debt a gender issue? And what could debt relief do for gender equity? Whoever wants to go first, it's okay.
Oh, well, I'll just bringing it back to having, I've mentioned policies that we advocate for, like improving, the equal pay law, which thankfully Philadelphia has a good equal pay ordinance. But we see even when people graduate from college, there's right away, there's first of all a disparity in student loan debt. And I should say there are gender racial disparities. None of these are just specifically gender, it's always intersecting with race. And then we see that gap, the pay gap, becomes larger incrementally throughout someone's career. So there's so many opportunities to, from even the building of the debt, graduating into the world with student loan debt already, and then seeing how that gap expands over time. That's the relationship. When you're paying off your student loans or other sorts of, debt, and you're making less money, you're obviously going to have less ability to accumulate wealth for your family and to make those decisions,
Yeah, and I think the racial piece, right? Especially, as a Black woman, I grew up in a single parent household. As my mom ages, she now lives with me, so that's an added responsibility. There's not only a lack of generational wealth, but there's an added responsibility generationally, right? Which is also an extraction of resources from communities. So and women tend to be the caregivers. My brother would probably not take care of my mother in the same way that I would, even though I have 3 children and I am a single mother as well. So all of these things compound. Women are also more likely to accumulate medical debt because of gender-specific medical care. I just had a baby. I have a 1-year-old. And as I was going through the process of birthing, and I was high-risk pregnancy, and those medical bills add up. I have great insurance. I'm an educator, and I think I'm extremely privileged and fortunate to have great insurance. And I still had a copay of $15 every time I went. And being high risk, it was 3-4 times a week. So there's that added responsibility. And then there's also court-related debts in cases of family-related separations, child support cases, and yeah, I think debt relief, what that would look like for gender equity, I think it would be transformational. Gender, in terms of gender equity and racial equity, it would mean financial freedom. It would allow women to leave abusive relationships, right, without added economic constraints. It would allow access to education without the financial punishment. As Tara mentioned, we graduate with student loans, and then the interest accumulates and it compounds, and it becomes a cycle that we just can't get out of. Greater economic mobility, reducing gender wealth gaps, and allowing us to invest in our future, but also connecting it back to that intergenerational piece. I worry about my babies. I can't afford my college. I'm still trying to figure out how to pay for my college. And now my daughter graduated early and wants to go to UCLA. So thinking about the future and intergenerational financial power, I think that'll be transformational, not just in the moment, but for futures to come.
Thank you for that. And thank you for just the personal story that you lifted up, and just kind of seeing how it all weaves in, because it's not, and I know it keeps coming back to this occupational segregation, but it really doesn't matter what your income kind of looks like. Like, we're all kind of seeing it. So I appreciate you being on the panel as an expert in it, but also lifting up your personal story and sharing how you're even impacted and thinking about it, because generational wealth is something that we often don't talk about, how is wealth transferred, right? But we see it from men to women, from your husband to the wife. But what happens if that's not your setup and you end up taking care of your parents and things of that nature? So I really appreciate you lifting that up. And we're just gonna hoorah and make sure that your daughter does get into UCLA, your baby, okay? So we rooting for them, okay? I would love to just kind of move forward and go on to the next question. And this is really kind of slated for Elizabeth and Tara. And this is really around, like, what is the social safety net, right? We spoke just about in the last question, the piece of generational wealth came up, right? And what does that look like? But what is the social safety network, and what is the state of it for women living in the US right now?
I can start with some of that. There is a social safety net, but I wouldn't say it is really sufficient. I mean, in general, the childcare workforce, the majority have utilized social services in the past 6 months from when we surveyed in the past year. So that is, people working full time. you know, some who were working 60 hours a week, and 60% had utilized, the majority was SNAP and Medicaid. But to be eligible for those benefits, working so many hours just seems like we've got something wrong here. And then for, you know, the childcare workers, there's no benefits or retirement, you know, savings that are part of that. That's something that these small businesses are sort of trying to scrimp together on their own, and some are offering. But for our, you know, home-based childcare programs, which tend to be really high quality, really supportive for our infants and toddlers, our children with special needs, and are really preferred by parents to reflect, you know, their community culture. They're not considered a nonprofit. So there's all these, you know, grants for nonprofits and they're not eligible. So there's not a lot of options for them to try to, you know, continue to provide this service without, you know, just adding on to their own debt. So most of our, you know, aging childcare workforce does not have a retirement plan, doesn't have health insurance. And they're part of the social safety net for others. There's, you know, we do have emergency childcare where you lose your job, you have a few weeks of childcare while you're job hunting. While you're in school, you can be eligible for childcare subsidies. But then for the people who are providing this for the workforce at large, there's not really much of a net for them.
Thank you for that. Tara, would you like to?
Yeah, I'll add on that from my perspective, there's of course the assistance programs that make up the patchwork of a safety net across the country, but also that good and bad law informs the safety net, and it's as can be, you know, perceived as part of the safety net. For example, you know, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, the federal Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which mandates accommodations for pregnant people at work, was passed last year, and that's part of the safety net because an outrageous amount of people are still pushed out of the workforce due to pregnancy, despite, you know, the federal Pregnancy Discrimination Act signed in the 60s. So there's all these gaps from these, you know, decades old laws that are like sturdy, big picture laws, and then we see how it actually plays out on the ground. So if there's good law that it's enforced well, that's fewer people being pushed out of the workforce and fewer people that then are going to have to seek the assistance programs that we think of the safety net. Same thing, you could really think of it for every law, you know, Title IX, if it's being enforced and a person's, you know, a young athlete is looking for a scholarship, then if Title IX is enforced appropriately at her school, she'll have more opportunity to play, more opportunity for a scholarship, which leads to graduating with less debt. So it's all connected, but I just urge, from my vantage point, I also see good law and ensuring the enforcement of those good laws as part of the safety net. And then unfortunately, people that situations that drop beyond that, hopefully there's adequate assistance programs. But as we can see, just in literally the last few hours, there's been back and forth about, you know, about safety net programs in the country. So it's all very precarious right now.
Thank you for that. And thank you for just lifting up where we are currently. And one thing that I do want to just make sure that I lift up that Tara mentioned was really this piece of like good law enforced well is really an intersection of like how we address a lot of these things. And Tara mentioned also, although it may not serve everybody, there still will be a need for some people to have additional supports. We have to remember there are good laws out there. They just need to be enforced well. And then for the others, that's when we have all of these different programs and initiatives that really kind of can fill the gap. So thank you for lifting that up. And this is going to bring me to the next question. And this question is for Elizabeth, but of course, everybody else feel free to really kind of add on. So how can guaranteed income initiatives boost job stability?
That's a great question. So our organization has been working on a project, a guaranteed income project with a home-based childcare organization. And the group had chosen home-based childcare as being an especially disproportionately underpaid field. And the the program has been awarding the participants an income stipend of $500 a month. And that has already, in its short time, yielded some expectedly positive results, mostly in a reduction of the programs that had planned to close or were uncertain about whether they would be able to remain open. And we saw, feedback such as I was able to pay my mortgage, I was able to pay my bills when for reference, Philadelphia transitioned its contractor for the payment of childcare subsidies in June, and the old contractor failed to pay the childcare field in Philadelphia, hundreds of providers for their June work. So that was an unexpected administrative issue, but this allowed many of them to not fall behind on their mortgage payments, to make their rent, and things like that. But I think what we're seeing, I mean, in terms of the workforce, this is stabilizing the home-based childcare field, which is important for maintaining, families' abilities to go to work. But then it's also just shedding light on it's not enough if this additional income wasn't leading to people improving their programs. It was primarily helping people catch up on bills or pay their rent and mortgage. A few folks were able to buy new materials and things, but we haven't given them an infusion to the point that they're ready to, expand, or they can make some important improvements in their program. So hopefully we'll get to that point. But, with a more stable childcare workforce, we really improve the workforce opportunities for parents, especially mothers. We had a report out last year that showed that inadequate childcare is burdening Pennsylvania's mothers to an average of over $4,000 per year just in lost earnings from either having to quit a job or leave work early or have to take more days off. And then, an additional loss on productivity. So if you go to work, but your child is not at a good childcare, you're not confident about it, or they have to close early, or their hours don't match your work, we're losing productivity. And then just the loss of taxes for people that, if they'd had adequate childcare, they would have been more productive. They would have done better for themselves. They also would have done better for the local economy. So if we get to those teachers, those educators, to the point where they can actually go out to eat, they could actually go out to a restaurant with their family, that's a local business. They can actually go out and enjoy their community. They're going to be supporting the businesses in their community. The vast majority of money in childcare stays in the local economy because the biggest expense is the staff salaries. So really vital and sort of unappreciated way of supporting our economy is supporting our home-based childcare and our childcare sector in general.
Thank you for that. And I do think you hit on something that I think a lot of times in the spaces that I'm in, right, we forget just about how people feel about entering the workforce, just the feeling of getting up and going to work. And these types of programs at times can reduce that stress and really kind of create a space for people to really breathe, right? And figure out what they want to do next. So I think that's something else that we forget that is missing. And I do love this thing. I think I'm going to take this, Tara. Like, I'm going to say this in every panel I'm on, like, good law enforced well, right? So I would want to know if any of you guys have anything you just want to chime in or add to what was said from Elizabeth from around just guaranteed income initiatives and just how it boosts job stability and how it plays into our economy. If not, we'll go on to the next question. All right, so I think it's been answered, and we see your comments in the chat, so we're doing good. This question is really the next question is slated for Dr. Brooks. Of course, everybody, and feel free to chime in. And it's how are debt, job opportunities, and social safety nets connected for women in particular? You spoke earlier about this cycle, right? But how are these inputs in the cycle like all connected?
Yeah. So yeah, for women, especially Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, low income women, these are all deeply intertwined. I think from a debt analysis lens, it's going to offer a few different perspectives than has already been offered. Debt limits job opportunities, right? So when you take on a higher level of student loan debt, when you take on payday loans, but you're a lower earner, because of the gender gap, it just makes it hard to pay off the loans. Makes it hard to invest in your career advancement. It makes it difficult to go back to school. So you're forced into lower paying jobs just to get through the day to day without having the opportunity and the foresight, because of that lack of opportunity, to pursue something that's more long term, career building. And then the job precarity increases the reliance on debt, right? So when you're overrepresented in the low wage and part-time jobs and the lack of benefits like healthcare, like paid family leave, like retirement, without all of these social safety nets that most people are afforded. I shouldn't say most anymore, that most people were afforded in this country, like affordable healthcare, paid family leave, childcare, right? When you don't have those opportunities, you do have to turn more to credit cards. You do have to turn more to payday loans. You do have to accrue more medical debt. So yeah, I think the last point is the lack of safety net. It just forces us into these cycles of debt, right? Without the affordable housing, childcare, access to education, we're just borrowing to survive. We're borrowing to meet our basic needs. The burden's getting heavier for everyone, but it's especially heavy for marginalized folks, for single mothers, for caregivers, formerly incarcerated people, right? That we haven't brought that up in this space, and people who face systemic barriers to stable employment. So yeah, I think debt leading to job precarity, leading to increased reliance of debt, creates a system where women are just financially trapped. And I think true opportunity is going to require dismantling of these structures. It's going to require access to the reparative public goods. And we're going to have to ensure that there's a society that women can participate in without having to go into debt to do so.
Thank you. And I think things that people often forget about when debt is accumulated is things like housing insecurity. Like you can't even get an apartment, especially in living in major cities. So it's a lot of things that, as we talk about the things in depth, they're like basic needs that you can't do when you're entering these spaces that sometimes we forget and we look at people and we go, how did you get here? Right. And it's very unfair for someone to ask that question without understanding these different layers that folks actually have to navigate and jump hurdles through to really kind of be self-sufficient. And as it was mentioned at the top, around freedom from financial restraints. So if you got to use your credit card to pay your rent or your mortgage, we have to ask questions, right? And it's not always, oh, I live above my means. It's like, no, this is where I am. This is what I need to do to survive. So I think, it's important that we think about, are people just surviving or are they navigating the different structures that are in place to ensure that, not ensuring that, are putting them back on this cycle of like, I can't get out. So I thank you for lifting that up. We're going to go to the next question, which is really kind of going in a little deeper on this piece. So I'm throwing it at you, Tara. And Elizabeth, and it's really how can policy encourage stability and opportunity, and what laws, policies, or practices have been or can be enacted to support?
I could start off. So I spoke to some of the legislation, that should be advocated for to be improved already. But I do want to underscore that policies that improve access to healthcare, the broad healthcare, including and especially mental health care, are so important to debt. Like, look, being sick is expensive, and being discriminated against is expensive on the side of workplace justice policies. So the whole suite of policies to improve equitable access to medical care and mental health care, as well as addressing workplace justice issues like equal pay, like pregnancy discrimination, like wage theft are important. And they're all going on, you know, pretty much at all times, because most of those things need to be improved at the city level, at the state level. The city and the state level is where the focus should be right now and is right now, given the regressive federal agenda. We don't expect to see a lot of those things advancing federally right now. But also want to just pivot to make sure that everyone knows about also, you know, we've heard a lot about the federal ERA, you know, a century of trying to get it passed, and it's been chaotic news about it the last couple of weeks. But, you know, many state constitutions have a state equal rights amendment. You know, what we're really, a lot of people are just learning about the power of state legal power, given the federal situation across these issues that we're talking about. And Pennsylvania in particular, we in fact were the first state to amend our state constitution with an equal rights amendment. Believe it or not, it passed in 1971 with no opposition, which we can't hardly even can hardly fathom now, but passed the legislature, was voted into our constitution by the people, added in 1971. Now, the state ERA swept Pennsylvania law for 14 years. There's dozens and dozens of court rulings and laws that were eliminated or equalized. I mean, it radically transformed Pennsylvania law to be more equal among the sexes. It's a really elegant little amendment that's like one sentence saying you can't treat men and women differently under the law. And so it was cited constantly. Unfortunately, it hit a wall in 1985 and was hamstrung by a bad decision in 1985 and was essentially dormant for the next 39 years. So Pennsylvanians were deprived, you know, our full constitutional rights to be free of sex-based discrimination for more than a generation. It was restored last year. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court restored our state ERA last year. So that is a new tool that we have. It has to be applied in the courts. You know, things have to be challenged for it to be applied. But that's a really powerful tool, sort of just in time, that, you know, really affected women's debt because it equalized inheritance laws, family, you know, family laws, divorce proceeding laws, all of those things that really go on to, you know, informed and caused uneven debt accumulation. So I think speaking of being an opportunity state, it's important for us to know that we now have that tool to wield once again, and hopefully could leverage it to equalize more laws across all of these spaces that affect our economic security.
Thanks. I can jump off from that. Tara, thank you for those examples. And I know you mentioned earlier the city's equal, the city of Philadelphia's equal wage, which has been helpful in childcare wages. That the city does have a city minimum wage, which is helpful for our childcare workforce that are working in a PHL pre-K program. But it adds another challenge that the other programs don't have those standards. So it leaves programs sort of stuck how to pay everyone you know, equitable wages when the other funding streams are just so underfunded. I think that goes to Diane and Kelly, the mental models you were talking about at the beginning, just this idea that women will just take care of the children because that's just their job, and they'll make do with nothing because they just always have. And you know, I saw this as a elementary teacher and had not expected it to be as much worse as it is in early childhood. But the lack of respect, the misogyny, and the racism in early childhood, just for people who are doing a really hard job, people who have the same degree, the same qualifications as our kindergarten teachers, but are also doing a huge amount of additional emotional and physical labor for these very young children. So the places where we are seeing some policy wins, you know, aside from the need for a culture shift around women's work, is the stability we've seen with contracts instead of our current subsidy reimbursement system. Currently, childcare providers who care for children using a childcare subsidy provide the care, and then at the end of the month, they submit their attendance report, and they get paid for all the days that the children who are eligible were there. So if a kid is sick, they're not necessarily getting paid for those days. And then if a child moves or a family loses their subsidy because they got, they got fired, or because they got a promotion and they're getting paid too much to be eligible for the subsidy, then the child care provider is stuck with a pretty unexpected financial setback. So we are encouraging the entities that be to shift to contract-based models where they're paying somebody for a month of service. We're paying you for your 10 preschoolers for this month. You keep your preschoolers enrolled. If somebody leaves, you have a certain amount of time to re-enroll that spot. So we do see a lot more financial stability for early learning programs that have access to pre-K contracts, because then they have a consistent income. They know what to expect month to month, and they're less vulnerable to, God forbid a family moves and they had 3 of their children out of 6 were in that family, and now they've lost half their enrollment and half their income. So moving to those contracts has been helpful. And unfortunately, until recently, most contract programs didn't allow home-based educators to apply, mostly because on the entity of the grantors, they felt it was simpler to send the contracts to bigger programs, and they hadn't sort of done the work of figuring out how to make it work for the smaller programs. So we are seeing the cities has made that possible. They've allowed home-based childcare providers to be PHL pre-K providers, which has been a game changer for the programs that have adopted, that have enrolled PHL pre-K children. Just that the amount of financial uncertainty, the amount of financial stress they were experiencing, kind of always trying to make sure that they had everything possible in line, and not being very insulated from financial setbacks, to suddenly having a consistent check every month, and they knew what to expect, and they could make their expenses work under that. So we're hoping as we move forward, we know that the big need is infant and toddler care, which is more expensive, and the teachers tend to be lower compensated less, even less than our pre-K teachers. So we are hopeful that the city will begin to include infant and toddler care in the PHL pre-K model, and that will be able to pay on the cost of care, not just the current system, which is pretty inequitable. The way they calculate the subsidy rate is they ask everyone to report what they charge. The programs only charge what the parents can afford. So they report what the parents can afford, and then the subsidy is reimbursed at a smaller proportion of that. So it's not an equitable system to calculate how much we should be paying for childcare when we know what it costs to operate, and we know what it costs to provide high quality care. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to build those policies, and that they'll be enforced fairly, so that childcare providers know what they need to do to be considered high quality and maintain their licensure, because that adds a lot of stress as well, to have regulations be enforced inconsistently and kind of constantly have this stress about, like, did I follow this regulation correctly? Is this person going to think I should have done it to the left or to the right? So there's a lot of areas for improvement here, but wages and funding overall are the big one.
Thank you guys for that. And just to circle back, I think there was a lot of good gems that were mentioned here, both of you guys, around, starting with Tara, around the sex-based discrimination work that's being done in PA, and then also around the opportunity state and just the equal wage stuff. So thank you for lifting that up. And then also from Elizabeth, just really diving into contracts. So I know so many people across the board, even here with us in New York City, where we have a new office that focuses on nonprofits. Contracts is how we contract and how we work with our community-based organizations and our providers. Is just such a big thing, and the reimbursement models do not work for all, right? And I think I appreciate you lifting that up and bringing it to the space, because while some of our bigger providers can take all of that on, they have the ability to. A lot of our smaller organizations and more grassroots organizations, right, more, I would say, super local community-based organizations can't really deal with a reimbursement payment model. However, I always will tell people it's important that we understand who they are, where they are, who they're serving, because they're going to do the work regardless. And that's kind of what you spoke to, just like women just being scrappy, right? In the household, even if we don't have it, we're going to make it work, right? And we're going to do it. But is that the best way for us to be operating our programs when we're really kind of pouring into communities at the same level and guiding the first generation? Because we understand those formative years are very, very important. And as a new mom who's looking for childcare providers, it's those things that I'm thinking about. So when we're thinking about all of this, I really like how you guys kind of merged it together and really lifted up those things. So it's a lot of things that we can support. And in New York City, we have some similar things like you guys as it relates to our paid family leave, right? That has increased, the universal childcare programs that we've been able to expand, and really looking at those home-based programs to say, hey, we're going to tell you what the standard is now. We need to be up in there, right? If it's one thing that you want to do is really ensure that we're creating a baseline for what standard is. So we can't always dismiss those smaller organizations, those smaller entities, because this is entrepreneurship and we want everybody to have the opportunity to either grow their business, right? Or even it's not always about scaling up. It's always about growing it, making sure that it's more efficient, making sure that you're getting better, right? Those are the things that we don't realize some people think about. It's not always about taking things to scale. So I really appreciate that. And you guys kind of lifting up. The next question is really around the future of stability and opportunity. And Tara, considering that the incoming political landscape, we understand what it is. How are you preparing for for what's coming and a lot of the things that we're seeing?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think of just building off what I was talking about earlier. Really, we've been focused for several years now in anticipation of, we got a glimpse of what was to come, and here we are. So really building state legal and constitutional power. I mentioned about the ERA, state ERA being restored after 39 years in Pennsylvania. In fact, WLP attorneys, to be clear, I'm not an attorney, will be in court next Wednesday. It's the first test of its scope and application, and that litigation we refer to as Allegheny Repro in deference to the lead plaintiff out in Pittsburgh, but seeks to, we're working to eliminate Pennsylvania's statutory ban on Medicaid coverage of abortion, which is the biggest barrier to equitable access to abortion in Pennsylvania. There's a study called the Turnaway Study that is a thorough, a detailed study that analyzed the economic futures of people seeking abortion care that were turned away from it for logistical or financial reasons. And it documents the, vastly increased likelihood of experiencing poverty, of having children in poverty, and so on. So that's a really big one for us right now. Beyond that litigation, we're advocating for lots of the policies that I've mentioned multiple times here that increases and expands equitable access to healthcare and workplace justice issues. If there was one issue, one policy that people were looking to really focus on in that realm, I would really say the Family Care Act. Pennsylvania has an opportunity to have a statewide paid family medical leave right now, and it has some robust support, but our lawmakers always need to hear from everybody to get that over the line. And we've talked a bit about how that kind of program improves, women's economic futures. And then finally, we are doubling down even more on communications and public education, because you need a good law enforced well that people know about, right? So lots of cases, even, for example, pregnant students, need to know that they have the right to remain in school and to access their education, no matter if they're newly parenting or if they're pregnant. And if they're pushed out of school before they find that out, and they find that out afterward, there might be able to achieve a remedy of some kind, but the ideal situation is that they never lose, the rhythm of their education to begin with. So I'd say that those, so we're really working, especially young people. It's a very confusing time for everybody, but young people are deprived of evidence-based, age-appropriate sex ed in our state and our city, as well as being, targeted for all kinds of disinformation campaigns. And the news is chaotic. So people really need to understand and know what their rights are so that they could actualize them and know when they're being deprived of them, and what, where to turn for help. So I'd say those are the three things that we're really focused on right now.
Thank you for that. So you just added more to the comment that I'll be taking from you. Good law enforced well that people know about, right? So I'll always say, as we're in the policy space and we're shaping policies and making laws, it is really important that people actually know about this so that they can speak to it, but most importantly, that they can tap into the opportunities. So I really like how you lifted that up. And I think that's a piece of all of the work. And I will say, for me, all my years in government, I always go, we don't do well with marketing across the board. It's like, how are we marketing this work so that the individuals that we want to utilize these services actually know about it and are speaking about it from an informed place that they can tap into the resources. So thank you for that. And I think one of the pieces that it seemed like people should think about is the Family Care Act in Pennsylvania. So really look into that and spend some time understanding that. And the other piece that you mentioned, Tara, the Turnaway study, is going to be information that I think is going to be useful for all of our work, to really kind of begin to even just read it and just understand what's happening there and be able to build a case of why certain things are important as we're moving forward. So thank you for sharing those pieces. Does anybody else want to comment on that? All right, going once, going twice. We're moving right on. So this is like, as we talk about it, and I do want to say this Turnaway study, a lot of the work is hard. The work that we all do, the work that all of you guys do is hard work. It's while we have our success stories, the stories that we have to get through in order for it to be success, it's not necessarily stories that we want to tell. Unfortunately, it's just the reality of the work that we're in. So I always tell people, like, that this is not work that's easy, that's cute. Like, we're in it when we're in it to win it, and we're in it because we all care about what we do and we care about the issues that are at the forefront and that are really kind of disrupting women across our nation. So I always want to just kind of step back and kind of say, what is the perspectives and mindset necessary for this work? And really thinking, as we're in this current political landscape, like, how should we be hopeful about what's to come, understanding where we are? Because I think there's always a piece of, like, we can't feel like, we're just fighting, the Queen's race is just going to keep going. We do want to dismantle, disrupt, and really kind of be change agents. So what are the perspectives and the mindset necessary for this work?
Yeah, I can open up there. I think a huge piece of the organizing and being able to move the ball forward, to dismantle a system that indebts folks, especially marginalized folks, it does require mindset. It requires a certain understanding. One, I think the biggest thing is debt is a structural issue, right? It's a systemic failure. It's not an individual failure, all right? I think personal, I'm going to always tie it back to my personal experience because I think that resonates with people. I, by the book, did everything right. I went to school, got a doctorate degree. I was married. I did what you should do textbook wise, and none of it worked out. And I ended up with $250,000 in student loan debt. And that's a lifetime sentence, right? I talked about me and then how it affects my kids and possibly their kids. So getting folks to understand that something is wrong, and I'm in education. There's no reason a teacher should have to pay $250,000 to go work in South Central LA, right? And that's what essentially what happened to me. So that's a deeply systemic issue. So we have to shift from personal responsibility to a mindset of systemic accountability. And then secondly, I think reparative public goods being a right and not a privilege. Education, healthcare, housing, childcare, all of that needs to be freely accessible. We need to take into consideration who has been historically excluded in this country and ensure that there's wealth building opportunities for them, first and foremost. Another thing that I want to add, women, typically when we think of labor and value and how we value labor, women's labor is unpaid and it's undervalued. We need to shift that mindset. The economy relies on women's unpaid labor in caregiving, in the domestic work, in community organizing, in holding down the church, in child rearing. All of that needs to be valued. And then the last piece that I'll add, this may be a bit controversial, but I think abolitionist thinking is necessary. I think we cannot just accept small policy tweaks. We have to be intentional with questioning a world that allows predatory debt systems to exist. We need to be moving toward a world where women have access to resources without financial punishment, and what that looks like, and organize around that.
Thank you. As you ended with abolitionist thinking, it is literally the abolitionists that moved us forward so many years ago. And also as an educator myself in New York, in the City University of New York City, this is something that I speak to my students about as I teach a class on women in government, right? So I appreciate you bringing that up, and want to just open up the opportunity for the other, for Tara and Elizabeth to really speak to that and just this piece of hopefulness. After we wrap up here, we're going to open it up to Q&A. So would love you guys to just speak to where do you see this moving and what's the thing that we all need to be doing, just being hopeful about the work.
Yeah, I echo everything Dr. Brooks mentioned as what is needed for this to be an equitable system. And I think the part of the mindset is really just an unwavering conviction that what we're doing is the right thing. And that anything in the way is an education opportunity or a way of or finding out where our true barriers are so that we can intentionally address and break them down.
Yeah, and I'll be briefed in deference to the Q&A for people who have questions, but I would say to, three things: to, always need to be intersectional, always need to stay in your lane while seeking alignment. And then on my tough days, I think about just really the long view. I really think about the privilege of being, part of this long, hopefully never ending legacy of, people that are fighting the good fight, doing the right thing, and that this isn't episodic. It feels that way in our lifetimes. From the time you tune in, suddenly you're like, oh, these are the current battles and I want to win this current battle, but that it's really, I'd say it's a lifestyle more, more than a project. And it really does sustain me to think about, all of the people that I'll never meet or even potentially know about that came before me, and how I'm able to be in this particular spot to push, our movement forward in this particular way.
Beautiful. And I just want to look, because if I made t-shirts, I'm going to take away from all of you guys. So abolitionist thinking is something we should be grounded in, unwavering conviction of thinking that what we're doing is right. Love it, love it. And intersectionality and staying in your lane while finding alignment, and the long view, right? And it's a lifestyle, not a project. So these are things that I capture from all of you guys as you were talking, and it really just makes me smile and it brings joy, because this work is hard, and it's not easy work. And I think it was said already, this is not just like a little project, a pet project for us. This is the lifestyle, because what we're asking for is lifestyle change so that everybody can have a lifestyle. And I'm like a pop culture person, so as the girlies like to say, a soft life. These are the things that we're thinking about, and these are the things that the next generation is asking for. in this current iteration. They may talk different, their language may be different, but what is the soft lifestyle? It is accessing opportunities that are available for them to just live, breathe, and thrive. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Brooks. Thank you, Elizabeth Farwell, Ozer. Thank you, Tara, Murtha, and thank you just for creating the space and talking with us today. And I am going to open it up to the floor. So I'm passing it over to Women's Way to really kind of handle that section. This was just a wonderful discussion with you all. So thank you for allowing me to facilitate.
So we're, I believe, moving to the questions that are in the Q&A, and thank you to the audience for asking your questions. So one question here, what are your organizations doing to help marginalized genders other than cisgender women? And that's open to anyone on the panel and moderator.
I can jump in because I actually have really new news on this front. So in the big picture, we do a lot of things. I've been talking a lot about the state ERA that actually, doesn't just help women or just help men, that helps everybody, LGBTQ people, transgender people. But earlier this week, we signed a letter with our allies pushing back on the anti-trans executive order. But the big news that I want to tell you is actually accomplished in partnership with a transgender woman in Pennsylvania who came to us for help after being denied healthcare that she needed. And the press release is going out tomorrow, but I'll give you all insight that part of the settlement, she wanted to seek, she prioritized, and we prioritized systemic reform over just, personal remedy. And so a big hospital system in rural Pennsylvania has committed to take steps, very specific concrete steps that we actually see as an outline for other hospital systems to be able to follow. It's about, 8 or 9 commitments to improve the LGBTQ patient experience, to ensure that transgender people are not denied the life-saving healthcare to which they are entitled lawfully and morally. And so that's, new news that's really local and tangible that, hopefully fewer of our gender expansive friends will have that experience of being denied care and treated poorly. And hopefully more hospital systems follow suit in the wake of this hospital system that made those commitments. And then, I almost forgot, of course, we're always doing state level legislative advocacy. There's the Pennsylvania Fairness Act, which I don't believe has been reintroduced yet in this brand new 2-year session, but it will be. We are many years into fighting for that, as well as, unfortunately, this session is going to require a lot of defensive policy work on the state level. There's some anti-trans legislation, including, and I think of that broadly, including some efforts to deprive young people of medical privacy, for example. And so we, track those bills, write policy, write testimony and testify against them and advocate against them and do what we can to inform everybody who cares about those issues about it so that they could participate in that advocacy too.
I'd love to just chime in really quickly. So under the Mayor's Office of Racial Justice and Equity here in New York City, I'm the executive director of NYC Her Future, which is an entity slated to really kind of support our young women across the city. But under the umbrella, we have another project called the Unity Project. And the Unity Project is our arm that really kind of prioritizes and addresses the needs of the LGBTQ plus community. And from that, they do a lot of work in the health space and really kind of creating programs, but also looking at programs that are designed and saying, hey, we need to be a little bit more inclusive here, or creating carve-outs to ensure that the nuanced needs are being met for individuals entering that space. For example, in New York City, we have the Summer Youth Employment Program. But what does that look like? What does employment look like for a young person that may be transitioning, a young person that is still trying to find their gender identity and how they're navigating the terrain? So creating spaces for them in that forum where we're really kind of saying, well, what does it look like for you to come and talk about it or feel feel at peace in the space, and really pairing you with organizations and workforce opportunities that are a little bit more aligned and understanding, but making sure that we're training those workforce providers to understand who's entering their space, who are these young people. So it's a lot of different hats that we wear under our office that really kind of support the work as it relates, but are aligned. So we're all aligned, but we have our different, to Tara's piece of staying in your lane, but making sure that there's alignment. I understand the work that I'm doing here. And then I have another entity that really focuses on our young men of color. And then the Unity Project really focuses on the LGBTQI plus community. So we stay in our lanes, but we understand the nuance of how individuals need to be served and how they're accessing program. And we're making sure that we're creating carve-outs to really support them, but not treating it as others, but making sure that it is inclusive and built into the program design.
Thank you for that. Moving to our next question here. What news outlets do you rely on for your news? Open to anyone.
I would say I follow a lot of different news outlets. I've found that I do appreciate the really straightforward, women-focused Jezebel newsletter. I also do follow news outlets from other countries to see what, to prevent against my news being filtered a certain way. But I think finding someone that you think is reliable and subscribing to a newsletter is maybe more reliable than worrying about your, social media algorithm showing you what you want to see.
Yeah, I think that's key. Anytime that I get a news article, I typically just verify it with multiple sources before I jump into kind of assessing my own thoughts about it. I think that's what's most important for me. I like The Nation. I like Real News. I get my sources and then just kind of make sure that they're reliable and that the news is can be verified before I intake anything from social media, because that can cloud your view on everything. And there's so much misinformation. So start there, start with articles first. Doesn't matter where you start. Make sure you start there and then just do some reference points.
I will echo Dr. Brooks. I try to read as close to primary sources as possible and avoid influencer content, no matter what direction it's coming from. Sometimes I stop and do a deep dive on a particular influencer post to sort of assess where they're at, how closely tethered to real information they are. So I'd really warn against that. That's a really easy way for not just disinformation, but misinformation, like someone doesn't understand the law perhaps, and they're giving you a summary and then you have bad information. But I also, I read, my opponent's news outlets, my algorithm's a mess, my ads are a mess. Because I'm in there listening to podcasts and all those kinds of things, because as a communications person, it's really helpful for me to see framing, everything, how we frame our issues, how they frame the issues. And I find that really informative and helpful for my work as well.
Thank you. And the last question here might be a bit specific and localized, so it's okay if you don't know. What are we doing for teenage moms in urban communities in Southern New Jersey? Also, are there any agencies working with girls or women in recovery?
I can answer a little bit. We don't specifically work in Southern New Jersey. We have had programs out there in the past, and we do serve educators there if they are coming to us for trainings. But our parent involvement work is expanding to support parents supporting each other through lived trauma, to sort of address trauma and also connect with peers about kind of overcoming that to be stronger parents and families. And a lot of that does tend to be, does include, parents who are in recovery and places like that. But we haven't gotten as deep and specific as I think your question is showing, but I'll turn to see if anybody else has more.
No others. Okay, thank you for that. And I think just as a network for Women's Way, we are working with lots of different groups, organizations, and nonprofits. So if there's a desire to connect to or to connect to some of those orgs or find specific help, feel free to reach out to us. info@womensway.org, and we can help get you pointed in the right direction. So thank you for that question. Just keeping an eye on our time, I'm going to wrap us here and say thank you first so much to Nathifa Forde for your skillful moderation and facilitation. Big thank you to our panelists for sharing your work and your expertise and your opinions. You are truly a bright light in dark times. So thank you all to the panelists. We appreciate you, our community, for joining us. Give us your feedback on this session because we're constantly learning and we really value your opinions. So the link to the survey is in the chat. We will continue to unpack the gender wealth framework in each dimension in future Closing the Gender Wealth Gap series, which are listed here on the slide, and we hope you'll join us. Follow us on social media where we'll keep you updated on our work and connect as a community. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great night.